Greetings and welcome to part 2 of the Boston Comic-Con 2017 edition of the Department of Tangents podcast. It is bitterly cold outside here at the podcast kitchen just north of Boston, and you may hear the heater rumbling quite necessarily in the background. This is the last podcast of the year and the last batch of interviews with artists and creators done on the floor of Boston Comic-Con 2017 back in August. Opening things up is Sam First, proprietor of Monsters Are Good, a pop cultural apparel company specializing in horror-related characters and merchandise. Sam gives me his pitch for why the monsters are the good guys in all those old movies. Then I have a delightful interview with author and illustrator E.J. Barnes, who left a lucrative career to pursue her art and to write comics. Then I spoke with L.B. Lee of Mental Health Comics. It was strange visiting Lee's table surrounded by images of superheroes and these otherworldly creatures. Mental Health Comics specializes in very real-world issues like homelessness, cults, sexual assault, and gender identity. We talk about a few of the books in this conversation. Last, I spoke with Ryan Cady as the con was winding down. I believe they had actually already made the announcement that everybody needed to start making their way towards the doors. So we had a quick conversation about the Top Cow title Magdalena and about editing comics. Stay tuned after the conversation for Childish Words, a track from Kentish Long Tales, the latest album from Len Price 3. When the podcast comes back up next month, my first featured interview will be with Glenn Price, singer, songwriter, and guitarist of Len Price 3. And now, interviews from Boston Comic-Con 2017. I'm here at the Monsters Are Good booth with the owner and operator of Monsters Are Good. What is your name?
My name's Sam First.
Sam First, and this is a t-shirt and art company. How would you describe what you do?
T-shirts, accessories, design. I do a lot of design for hire. Mm-hmm. And so I do like concert posters and things like that for events around Boston. And
how did you hit on Monsters Are Good as your name and what you do?
So once I got out of school, I was having a lot of trouble finding a job, but I was spending a lot of time with my kid. And I was walking around, and I'm not a small guy. Uh-huh. I got a bunch of tattoos, and I was walking around with this sweet little girl, and I got a lot of weird looks. Uh-huh. And, you know, it came down to, like, there was a lot of people who just, they were making passing judgment upon, you know, they were judging a book by its cover.
Uh-huh. In what way? How did they express that?
Well, at the time I was living in the Midwest, and people were just generally a little bit judgier of people with my aesthetic and lifestyle choice. But off of that, you know, I've always been a big fan of the classic monsters from film, and I have always felt that they are grossly misunderstood. Uh-huh. Even if you go back and read the stories, if you watch the movies, the monsters aren't really trying to do anything bad. It's not malicious. Mm-hmm. You know, Frankenstein's monster did not ask to be created. Right. Everybody just kind of flipped out when they saw him, and obviously he reacted badly to that. But even so, he barely does anything wrong other than looking scary. You know, Dracula's cursed. He has to drink blood. That's how he can stay alive. Right. The Wolfman's cursed. He didn't want to be a Wolfman.
Yeah, Dracula seems to kind of enjoy it, though.
Fair enough. Dracula, I will say that there's some gray area there, but you know, and then the creature from the Black Lagoon. I mean, he's just looking for a date. I mean, he's really not. Right. You know, he's not. He's just looking for love in all the wrong places.
Right. If you were around today, it'd be a reality show. And...
Yeah. But so that was just kind of something that I felt was like, it's like in all of these stories, I feel like the people are way worse than the monsters themselves, and I feel like they pass judgment too quickly and end up causing a lot more issue because of their fear and things like that. So I also I found that there wasn't a whole lot of stuff out there that sort of took that point of view. And when I sat down and just started drawing stuff, I mean, monsters are they're fun to draw, but there isn't like everything's so serious all the time, and I try to keep it a little bit more lighthearted.
And you would consider yourself an ambassador for the monster world.
Absolutely, yeah.
And
It's me and Guillermo del Toro, and that's it.
But on this wall, we've got Frankenstein, we've got the Wolfman, we've got Creature from the Black Lagoon, we've got Godzilla, we've got Plan 9 from Outer Space, and you've got the Ramones, and more Dracula. What inspired each of these designs? How do these designs function to prove to people that monsters are good?
Well, I mean, in all of these cases, it's not necessarily a literal translation. I want to make shirts that people want to wear, and selfishly enough, mostly that I want to wear. But it goes as far as with, let's say, the Creature from the Black Lagoon shirt here.
Right.
It's not really the Creature from the Black Lagoon, but even if you want to argue that it is, it's actually a drawing of a 1960s fish tank ornament.
Right.
Which, out of context, you don't notice it, but once you know that, it sort of changes how you look at it. So, the proportions of those fish, for instance, starts to make a little bit more sense.
Right. And the wavy grass.
Yeah. And I get, a lot of my inspirations comes from a lot of the silly monster toys that came out in the 60s. Like the Magic Mummy design right here. That was actually a toy. It was the Magic Mummy. It was this little tiny novelty toy that it was a little sarcophagus, and it would jump out, and it was like come to life action. And I mean, in this case, I modified it so it's not just a sarcophagus. It's more like of the Cheney mummy.
Yes.
So. The Godzilla isn't really Godzilla. It's a sparking wind-up toy.
Right.
The King Kong is actually a blow mold bank from the 70s.
I may have had that bank. I was trying to place that design.
They're about 18 inches tall, and they were made by a company actually out of Massachusetts. And then...
you got the Ramones design.
And then the Ramones, I just love the Ramones. And I felt that, I wanted to do something a little different than what everybody else had been doing with the Ramones logo and replacing the names out. So I went as far as to do the full cover. And
you got Frankenstein, Dracula, Wolfman, and Creature there.
Yep.
Did you? Was there a decision-making process as to which monster mapped best to which Ramone?
Definitely, actually. I mean, Joey was tall and lanky, so I mean he had to be Frank.
Right.
Johnny was kind of a little dick, so we went with Dracula, and then I made Dee Dee the Wolfman because he was kind of unhinged, and the quiet one Tommy. It's just how it worked out.
Yeah, Creature has not much choice but to be quiet because it's underwater.
Yeah.
So how has this been today? It's
seeming really pretty good. Yesterday was a lot busier, a lot more consistent. But yeah, I think it's been a good show.
And where can people get these things?
You can find us at monstersaregood.com. We're also on Instagram as just Monsters Are Good, and Facebook and Twitter. And we're all over the place.
All right. Thanks for talking. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Right, here with E.J. Barnes at Boston Comic Con, and since this is the Department of Tangents, it seems very appropriate, looking at the scope of what you've got on your table here, that I talk to you about this.
Well, my self-publishing arm is called Drowned Town Press. I used to live in Amherst, so I was beyond the Quabbin Reservoir, hence the Drowned Towns. And the subtitle of my business is Eclectic Comic Books and More. So I've got a lot of historical comics that I have written and drawn, illustrated with ink wash. Some of it is watercolor. So I've got some humor. I've got a watercolor travelogue of a trip to Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia that I took a few years back. And I've even got a short story that I wrote when I should have been working on comics called Tree Rats, or the Crepuscular Hobby Horse.
Yes, it's a great word, crepuscular.
Yes, actually, that's a sort of a MacGuffin because it starts with a guy who takes to shooting at the squirrels in his yard from his bathroom window with a BB gun, and it goes downhill from there. It's really a road trip gone wrong.
Right. Well, if you're shooting at squirrels with a BB gun from your bathroom, you're not starting from a particularly high point on the hill to begin with.
No, or I've also got some comics which I adapted, where I adapted the short stories of Blaster Al Ackerman, whose short stories I have long admired. He died back in 2013, but he gave me permission to adapt his stories about the Ling Master as comics. And
there are 3 of those here.
Yes, there are 3 of those, and there are 3 stories in each of those volumes. And the whole premise is it's a takeoff on the old pulps. The Ling Master wants to be a hero like the Shadow, but he's not really up to it. So the only people he can help are bigger losers than he is. Now, the history comics I've got include Carolyn's Catalog, which is about Carolyn Herschel, the astronomer, the 18th century astronomer, younger sister to William Herschel, the discoverer of the planet Uranus. But he would give her his old telescopes, and she wound up discovering 8 comets. And I've also got a book about Dr. John Dee, who was astrologer to Queen Elizabeth I. But this is a darkly comical take on his troubled relationship with his assistant, Edward Kelly, which is a matter of historic record. A lot of the gags in this book come right out of Dee's diaries. You wonder how he put up with the guy.
Well, you would say if it's a darkly comic book, you would wonder how that subject matter would lend itself to being a darkly comic.
Well, I've done a great deal of reading in the history of the occult. I'm working on a graphic novel about Count Cagliostro. And in the course of reading about the history of the occult, I encountered Dr. Dee. And when I read about what was going on between him and Edward Kelly, I felt this, Dee has appeared as a villain in some fiction, some novels. He's portrayed as this powerful mage, and here, reading what his later career was like, he's more of a hapless figure. He didn't know how to do the sort of court politicking that was necessary to stay in the Queen's good graces, and so I portrayed his relationship with Kelly as sort of farcical and kind of sad for Dee, because he winds up being on the short end of the stick a lot of the time.
Well, how do you decide what you're going to do next? I mean, there's one of your comics here is Birds of the Baltic. Then you've got Me and the Doctor. You've got the Ling Master. You've got Tree Rats. You've got Caroline's Catalog.
Well, part of the problem is that I am interested in too many things.
Yes. I understand the problem.
Yes. And when I get ideas, it's easier to get ideas for stories than it is to get the time to sit down and do something about them.
Yes.
Now, my latest comic that I just premiered at Boston Comic Con this weekend is called Laird MacGuffin's Treasury. And I actually started it as a 24-hour comic. I did not finish it in 24 hours, not by a long shot. But it's
a wordless comic, it says here.
It's actually almost wordless. So that already that's false advertising because
I won't tell anyone. Things like that can get around at a Comic-Con and it'll ruin
right.
it.
Okay, so my secret is safe with you.
Yes.
Okay, so like it's almost wordless in the sense that okay, there's a sign that says "in." There's a character that laughs uproariously. Ha ha ha.
It's
so,
spoken wordless. Then there are words,
right.
but nobody speaks.
Well, but there is
They
dialogue.
laugh.
There is dialogue, but all the dialogue
Is in pictures.
is in pictures. So I wanted to do, when I do a 24-hour comic, I usually have some ideas before I go in, but I don't write anything down until the clock starts.
Right, and 24-hour comic being something you complete in 24 hours.
You're supposed to complete a 24-page comic in 24 hours. I have tried this 3 times and succeeded only once. What I try to do is, with a 24-hour comic, is sit down and write myself a script. If I can finish writing the script in an hour or less, I know I'm on track. This actually took longer to write than I thought it would. But you know, I wrote it as a wordless or mostly wordless comic, among other things, because I didn't want to get bogged down doing hand lettering.
How did you get into to comics? What sparked your interest?
Well, actually, this is my 3rd career, but I have been drawing since I was a wee tot. I learned to read from the funny papers. My mother used the newspaper comics to teach me how to read. And so I was doing a lot of cartooning when I was little. I wound up majoring in chemistry, spent a number of years as a software engineer, and then finally leaped into the breach and got into doing enough with my art that I reached what I considered to be a professional level. I was an editorial cartoonist for several years for the Greenfield Recorder in Westford, Mass. If they wanted a cartoon about a national issue, they could go to the syndicates, but if they wanted a local cartoon, they needed a local artist.
Right, and that was the jump from software to that. How did you get that job after being a software engineer?
Well, actually, I quit my job as a software engineer before getting the gig, but I had projects I wanted to work on. I started working on the Ling Master comics before I left software. And I knew people in the newspaper business. I mean, I knew people who worked for the Greenfield Recorder, and one of them told me that the editor was looking for a new cartoonist. So, yeah, that's how I got that gig.
But it seems like there are probably very few people who leave software engineering to go into drawing comics for themselves and their own.
Well, have you ever heard of a fellow named Elvis Costello?
Yes.
He was a software engineer or a computer programmer before he was famous as a musician. So,
yeah, it seems like a risky move.
It is a risky move. It's a very risky move. I'm making a hell of a lot less money as a cartoonist. I do some commercial illustration, and that helps pay the bills. I'm also an evil landlord. But
that can pay off.
No, yeah. I do make a whole lot less money than I did as a software engineer.
For your other 2 careers, were you just thinking this is what I really want to do?
Yes.
And it finally presented itself that you
got
the chance
and
to do
you know, it was always in the back of my mind. I wanted to do something creatively as my career. So that was why I turned my back on software.
And what's next for you?
What's next? Well, as I mentioned, I have been actually for some years working on a graphic novel about Count Alessandro di Cagliostro, who was an 18th century alchemist, healer, Freemason, all-around mountebank. And
if you're going to be a mountebank, an all-around mountebank is the type.
Oh yes, oh yeah.
You don't want to pigeon yourself.
Right? No, not at all. He had a knack for reinventing himself. But he was active in Europe in the 1700s, primarily from the 1770s to 1795, when he was arrested in Rome and tried by the Inquisition and died in prison.
That's the story you're telling.
The story I'm telling focuses on the 3 months he spent in the Duchy of Courland, which is now part of Latvia. Now, Birds of the Baltic recounts a trip I took to Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. And one of the things that I did on that occasion, which was in 2003, was I visited certain places where Cagliostro had been. Now, one of the places Cagliostro had been is now the city of Jelgava, under, in the 18th century it was called Mittau because it had a German-speaking ruling class. Unfortunately, many of the historic buildings were destroyed during the World Wars. So there were places where Cagliostro had been where I could not go because they had built something completely different on the site. But
a McDonald's or it's a completely different castle.
Yes. But the graphic novel focuses on the point of view of a young woman named Eliza von der Recke, whose father had been very big in the local Freemasonic community, and who was also into alchemy. And so
it's not
it sort of goes back to my. Remember, I majored in chemistry.
Right.
This is the reason I got interested in Cagliostro, is because I was fascinated with the idea of somebody who was claiming to be an alchemist at a time when what we know as scientific chemistry was coming into being. So people like Lavoisier and Count Rumford this was their heyday.
It's not your typical fodder for a graphic novel.
Well, actually, I have completely written the script. It's going to be over 270 pages. I've started painting it. I'm painting it in watercolor.
Oh, that seems to be somewhat more popular to expand the style in which a comic is presented.
Yes.
Maybe, I don't know when it started, but the past maybe decade or so, it seems to be painting. It seems to be a bit more popular.
I credit the digital age because
the transfer works better.
Yeah. Yes. Now, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, color comics had to be colored using overlays on which you stuck zipatone, which was this mechanical tone which you cut out pieces of, and you would say, okay, this overlay is going to be the magenta printing, this overlay is going to be the yellow printing, this overlay is going to be the cyan printing, and that's how you would get full color. And some poor sap had to cut out pieces of zipatone and stick them on the overlays and make sure they were registered right, so when they were shot, they'd print correctly. And that's why most comics in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, the color is so blocky. You have basically large expanses of solid color.
Yeah.
And you would have reference books that would tell you what percentage of cyan versus what percentage of yellow you needed to make certain shades of red, And so it wasn't subtle at all. Now with digital coloring, you have two different schools that you could go into. You can do the coloring digitally on the computer, and you have literally hundreds of thousands of colors you can create that way. So you can create the subtle color digitally. Or thanks to scanning, full color scanning, you can scan traditional media like watercolor or colored pencil or oil painting. If you know the work of Alex Ross,
yes, I was going to mention him as
he works in gouache. There was a show of his work, of his original artwork, at the Norman Rockwell Museum a couple of years ago. Thanks to digital full-color scanning, he can illustrate that, comics in gouache, and it'll all turn out pretty much the way he painted it.
And what is gouache?
Gouache, Gouache, is an opaque watercolor.
Okay.
It's used a lot by graphic designers and commercial illustrators.
And when is the new project coming out, do you think?
Well, my plan is to paint the first 35 pages or so of the graphic novel, and then start approaching publishers. Because while I have published a wide range of different comics, I don't want to have to self-publish a graphic novel.
Especially one that's painted.
Yeah. I want to try to get a book publisher to publish this. And in order to put together my package, they'll want to know that the story is finished, in the sense that I know where it's going to go. I'll want to be able to show them the first so many pages so they'll see what style it's going to be visually. But at the same time, I don't want to paint all 270 pages and have the publisher say, "We love your project. This character's hair color has to change."
Right.
Yeah.
And where can people find out more about your stuff?
Well, my catalog is at Drowned Town Press. That's one word, drownedtownpress.com.
Okay.
And my portfolio is at ejbarnes.com. It's EJBARNES.com.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you for speaking with me. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
All right, sweet.
All right, I'm here at Boston Comic-Con again. I don't know why I keep saying that, because there'll be a bunch of these interviews on the same podcast with L.B. Lee of Mental Health Comics.
Yeah, I make mental health comics about topics ranging from multiple personality to gender to the tactics of cult leaders I know to depression, all sorts of cool stuff.
Cult leaders you know, in other words, you're familiar on a personal level with cult leaders.
Yeah, like one of my newer books out is Cultables 1. I was pen pals for like 2 years with a cult leader, and then I found out he was a cult leader, and thus ended our interactions. He is in jail until 2030 for kidnapping, sexually assaulting his teenage followers who he persuaded were really their role-playing characters.
Why were you speaking with this person for 2 years?
We were connected through an LGBT prisoner's pen pal website, and I didn't find out until much later just why he was in prison.
So that must have been... How was this person for 2 years before you found that out? Was it just a pleasant person, and then you found out?
Well, I'm not sure if pleasant would be the correct way to describe him. Like, there were some creepy things about him that I found off-putting, but I couldn't put my finger on exactly why. And once I found out just why he was in prison, like, at the time I figured my job was not to be a judge. And also it just seemed so astronomically unlikely. Like, I remember thinking to myself, well, what if he's killed somebody? What if he hurt a child, But the whole idea that he'd be a cult leader and go to that level just seems so astronomically unlikely.
Well, this seems like a strange candidate for a pen pal program as well.
I know, right? But he was on there, and actually, he probably could have kept me for much longer if he hadn't kind of given himself away. He wanted me to do something for him, and he lied, and I caught him at it.
Uh-huh.
And this sort of unraveled everything, and I lost my trust in him. I found out why he was in prison, and so I asked him, I said, I'm not going to be writing to you anymore.
Well, this was a prison pen pal program, so you knew they'd done something, right?
Yeah, but I figured, I had kind of made my peace with I thought of what seemed to be the most likely, a drugs offense, armed robbery, He could have been in there for insurance fraud or public urination or any one of a bajillion different things, tax evasion.
And what was your motivation for doing this? Just to help alleviate somebody's...
Yeah, I tried to make myself useful, but needless to say, I won't be going to one of those programs for a while. I kind of had my fill for a bit.
And you decided to tell your story?
Yeah, because the thing was, his story was so strange. I mean, persuading teenagers that they're really their role-playing characters. That's how they knew him. They were online role-players together. They played these games, and he persuaded them that metaphysically they were really their role-playing characters. Persuaded them to run away with him to California, and then he just locked them in his apartment and kept them there for a month. And the thing was, due to the nature of his crimes, it was originally thought that he had kidnapped the kids. And so it was, a missing children's report. There were articles. But then once they came back, sexual abuse allegations came to light. And since they were both minors, these original the missing children reports were deleted from the internet. So, the story was, broken up into pieces. There were folks who only knew it as a missing children's case, and then, because what happened was the kids came back after about a month, and then, there was no talk about for, it took, maybe, 8 months or something to a year for them to, really get going. The wheels of law turn slowly. He got arrested. And the police were interviewing the kids, and then sexual abuse allegations came, so the early newspaper articles were deleted and scrubbed from the internet, and that was redone as a children's sexual assault case. And the whole role-playing thing didn't really come up. So the story was broken in half. And I cobbled together the story I found the records of the original newspaper ones, because there was a Newshound forum that only knew as a missing children's case and had collated it. Kids returned, it was a closed case, they never checked up and never heard about the sexual assault allegations. So I cobbled it together from all the newspaper stories and the court documents and the letters that we had exchanged over the years.
I hate to dwell on just the one comic here. Just right off the bat was a kind of a strange story.
I know, it's a really weird one.
But the rest of your output here is not that. The rest of it
no,
seems more helpful or
yeah, in his case I wanted to talk about the tactics, isn't that every parent's fear that their child is playing an innocent role-playing game and then get taken into a cult? So I wanted to talk about the tactics of how he broke it down, but it kind of, I was doing other stuff like it. These are my self-help one-pagers.
Yeah, we're talking about smaller books on the table.
Yeah, they're very tiny. They're the size that fit in your wallet, and what you do is you fill them out when you're feeling good, keep them in your wallet for when you're feeling bad, used by mental health clinics in 3 different states. And that one that you're picking up right there, that's my happy, fun, queer, trans, sexuality zine. All happiness, no sadness. Just fun, light things, because my work was getting real dark for a while, and I cut myself off. I said, you have to do happy things for a while.
Do you find most work that revolves around the topic of being transgendered happens to be a little darker? That you wanted to do something?
Not necessarily. My gender stuff actually is some of the lighter stuff, honestly.
I mean, just in general, in pop culture.
Oh, yes. If you're the general rule is the trans person ends up dead, bashed, on drugs, or disowned by the end of the story.
What are the happy stories that are happening
Mostly it's like autobio. Like I talk about being happy and in love and like getting married. You know, stuff like that.
And you've got All in the Family.
That's the darkest thing on the table. It's a psychological murder memoir about the incest in my family.
That must have been a tough topic
to
decide to put out publicly.
Yeah, it was pretty rough, and honestly, I'm not sure I would have had the guts to do it, except I tried to talk about it with my family, and it became incredibly clear, like, my main goal was to try and protect the younger children still in my family, and it became rather clear that that was not going to happen. And sadly, the only thing my family has ever had reacted much to is public shaming. So I decided to make my story public. My family are not named in it, and honestly, I probably would have been happier if they hadn't found out at all, but they did. And, well, yes.
That's got to be a strange thing that this is a very personal story, and you're here at Comic-Con, and there's got to be something that's entertaining about it for you to have released it, and you're here at Comic-Con and the members of KISS are walking by and Boba Fett's walking by.
Yeah.
And you have this on your table.
Yeah, like, admittedly, the reason I'm at Boston Comic-Con is like a weird windfall, honestly. Like, so EJ, she was going to be at Comic-Con.
Oh my goodness.
And she needed someone to cover like a quarter of her table. So I bought like a quarter of her table. And then this dude, the guy at the table next door, never showed up, so I got the whole table. So, like, but usually I don't do 3-day events, you know, I get so worn out. And that there is the book of comics I did the year I was homeless in Somerville. And so, like, I knew going in that most people do not come to Boston Comic-Con to read these kinds of books.
Right, how has the reaction been?
Generally what I expect. Any event I do, 95% of people are not interested in what I make. And my goal is to just find the 5% who are interested. And so a lot of people have just had no interest whatsoever, which is to be expected. But some people, like, I've been shouting mental health comics, like, for 3 solid days. I'm getting hoarse. But, like, some people, most of them, like, I have some people who, like, almost violently are like, no, and just walk away. But other folks, you know, they, like, immediately turn around.
Not confrontational, though.
Oh, no, just sort of like, no, this is definitely not what I want.
Well, it strikes me when you say that 95% of people won't be interested, maybe 5% will. There are people who are doing things here that are in that same boat, that maybe it's not because it's a personal thing, but maybe it's because somebody's not quite interested in their aspect of time travel that they cover.
Yeah, that too.
They're looking at a 5% ratio probably of everybody walking around here. As well. It's an interesting sort of parallel between what you're doing and maybe what somebody else might be doing.
Yeah, and also, like, I don't have much competition. I've had some folks who are sort of like, oh, hey, this is something I haven't seen before. I didn't know people did this. Like, you know, I got a chance to walk around. You know, I see tons of, like, fan art of various, you know, shows and stuff, but I'm the only person here, as far as I know, doing mental health comics, so...
And that is your goal, to improve people's mindset.
Yeah, like, help folks out. Like, I want to be useful. Like, sometimes people ask, like, do you find catharsis in making this? And I'm just sort of like, I mean, I guess, but, like, mostly I find it useful to try and take these things that most people find very bizarre or unbelievable. Like, they hear about All in the Family or Cultables, and their reaction might be like, how could anyone do that? And my goal is to explain the why, and also how people get sucked into it. Because, like, no one intends to join a cult. No one, I would argue, like, intends to help people molest children.
Right. But
they kind of, like, sort of find themselves slowly getting sucked in until they find themselves doing things that, you know, were they consciously thinking about it, they might deeply morally disapprove of. Or have gone to a place they have not ever wanted to go.
And so where can people find out more about what you do and these comics?
I am pretty active online. I have a Patreon, I have an Etsy, I guess technically I am also on Tumblr and Dreamwidth, which is a blogging site, because I also write sci-fi and fantasy. So I have fans of like my speculative fiction writing and people who are fan of my nonfiction mental health comics, and some people are fans of both, but often never the twain shall meet.
Do they ever meet in your speculative fiction? Do topics like this ever pop up?
I do talk about psych issues and stuff, and like my fiction has a whole lot of queer characters and stuff in it, but it's not all about cults and horror.
Well, there's plenty of horror around as well.
True, yeah.
All right, well, thank you for speaking with me. I appreciate
No problem. Thanks for saying hi.
I'm Ryan Cady.
Ryan Cady,
Yeah.
and you are writer/editor.
Yes, yeah, sure.
Yes, and what do you write on?
I write Magdalena for Top Cow with Teeny Howard. We co-write it. I have a webcomic coming out with one of the larger webcomic platforms. I can't say which one, but it'd be easy to guess. And then I have some Boom stuff coming out. And then I do Warframe with Top Cow also. It's a licensed book based on the video game. And I'm in the DC Writers Workshop this year.
Okay, and what is that? What's that?
It's a talent development program that Scott Snyder started, where they just select young talent and train them to write DC books. It's an amazing opportunity. I'm super duper grateful, and I don't know how I squeaked by and sneaked in there, but
Well, you've got all these other projects you're working on as well.
yeah. They're in the fire. Some of them have already done because comics develop over time. So there's stuff that I wrote a few months ago and are only now being developed. So.
And you consider yourself chiefly a writer as well?
Yeah, editorial, I sort of fell into it because I was an intern, and then they needed an assistant editor, and I had only planned on just interning to meet people and learn how stuff worked, but I offered to do it just to learn, and I just sort of kept doing it for a while, and then the time came where it was untenable to edit and write at the same time, so I had to bow out of the editing because writing was where my passion was. But
what is the editing process? What is an editor on a comic do?
It's different at every publisher, but at Top Cow, I had to, it involved setting deadlines, assembling talent for books, sort of arranging who would do what on the book, keeping everybody on track is the hardest part, really. And then sort of the more traditional editing stuff, taking in the scripts, nurturing them, copy editing, that sort of thing. And also, actually, additionally, editors don't do this at every company, but at some they do, in going into the Adobe InDesign program and assembling the comic, where you lay down the pages in one layer and then lay down the lettering in another layer and making it nice and neat to send off to production to clean it up.
So that's a lot of responsibility for somebody else to...
Yeah, I mean, it's such an assembly line that there's always people looking over each other's shoulders, so there's always double checking, but it's a lot to do. Wearing many hats, I guess.
Right, wearing many hats, and you're also responsible to the creators in some way.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can imagine that.
Everyone, honestly, there are very, very few situations I feel very lucky, where creators were rude or super late or anything like that. There are a couple times, but in general, comics has been very kind, and I think everybody just wants to work hard on their books.
Right, and did that help you at all as a writer?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, for the few times that it was really bad, I was like, okay, well, I know what not to do. But in general, it was like, I see what ways that I would like to be talked to, things that other editors are going to need. Is really the biggest thing is that being on the other side, I'm like, okay, as a writer, here's what I should never do. Here's how I should phrase my emails and what to say to people and that sort of stuff. Just general decorum, I guess. And also a little bit is that I, when other editors give me deadlines or say things to me that I know aren't true, I can that's not really happened, but when editors exaggerate to make sure everything's squeaky clean, I can be like, well, I know you're exaggerating because I know how it works. That sort of thing.
And you have stuff that you're writing more for yourself and more stuff that you're writing. You mentioned, I forget the name of it, there's something you're writing for an adaptation.
Oh yeah, Warframe. It's
Warframe, right.
It's a free-to-play video game, and Top Cow is doing the licensed book. Yeah, I did. I have a couple creator-owned things coming out that are just all me. Those are going to be announced One is with Top Cow, and it'll be announced soonish, and then the webcomic and stuff, and then a few for hire stuff that's more just freelance for the other companies.
Do you approach them differently?
Yeah, absolutely. And just going back to what we were talking about editors, when it's freelance, I generally, you don't want to be a prima donna. If editorial is like, hey, this is what you need to do, you sort of just do your best to just do it, even if maybe you don't compromise, but you also aren't precious either.
Right.
Whereas when it's your own thing, you're working with editorial more for input, not authority. Yeah.
And where can people find out more about your stuff specifically?
Oh, absolutely. I'm on Twitter. I'm at Rycady, RYCADY. Twitter is where I'm most vocal about my work, but I have an Instagram as well, and people can follow me on Facebook. Top Cow will talk about all my projects I do with them as well on their websites, topcow.com and stuff.
An arrow to the head isn't always a trick.
Thanks again to Sam First of Monsters Are Good, E.J. Barnes, L.B. Lee of Mental Health Comics, and Ryan Cady of Magdalena and Top Cow for speaking with me. If you enjoyed these interviews, please take a few minutes and seek out their creations and support the artists. You can find Monsters Are Good products at monstersaregood.com or monstersaregood.storeenvy.com. You can keep track of L.B. Lee's work at healthymultiplicity.com and look for the books on Etsy. And you can find E.J. Barnes at ejbarnes.com and follow Magdalena and other Top Cow creations at topcow.com. The Department of Tangents podcast will be returning to a weekly format in January in just a couple of weeks. First up will be my interview with Glenn Page of the Len Price 3. The band released a cracking good new album called Kentish Longtails last year, or this year. I will admit, listening to the bristling punk attitude of the album, I wasn't sure how the interview was going to go, but Page is a wonderful gentleman, and I'm really looking forward to you hearing that conversation. So as a little preview, here's Childish Words from Len Price 3. See you on the other side, Ray.
Neil Young.